You're watching act.tv. I'm Julianna Forlano. The eyes of the world are on racial inequalities in the United States right now and across the world, actually. And while we hope outside pressure will help bring justice to Black communities, Americans really need to stay focused on what we can do from the inside as well. One way we can do that is through our labor unions, who often successfully win power back to their workers. How can they join the fight for Black communities? Are they already in process? Is there action happening? Professor Wolff is here to answer that question and discuss this topic. Professor Wolff is a Marxian economist. He is the host of Economic Update, which is syndicated on over 70 radio stations, probably more than that by now. I feel like a new one gets you every week. So we're going to have to update our numbers. He's also the author of several books, which we will talk about during the course of this interview. I suggest Googling Professor Richard D. Wolff Economic Update books and then immediately going and buying, all of them. Professor Wolff, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Juliana. I'm glad to be here.
Well, you predicted, uprisings in the street, and now we have them. Is it disappointing to be right?
No, in this case, I'm really glad about it. I agree with Dave Chappelle. The answers are coming from the streets, and that should surprise nobody because it's always that way. People tolerate conditions that are unfair. They tolerate conditions that are getting worse. They do it for a very long time. It frustrates a lot of us. But then in the end, it becomes one step too much. The people in charge take one step too far. And it's always one particular thing, that famous last straw that broke the camel's back. That image of George Floyd, that image of that 75-year-old man knocked to the streets by the cops. Those are images that are it's one too many. And suddenly it snaps, and then hundreds of thousands of people go into the streets to make it clear that there's trouble coming. You can't go on this way.
Have you seen evidence that the demands for justice of the Black Lives Matter movement and the other protesters who are in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement are expanding beyond police reform?
Absolutely. I think that you have to see it. It's the straw that broke the camel's back, but there were a lot of other weights on that camel. That straw was the final one, but it wasn't the only one. That's the point of that story. The straw wasn't enough, but together with everything else, it became. So here's how I see this. We are now 40 years into a situation where wealth and income have been redistributed in America from the poor and the middle class to the people at the top. Decade after decade, every economist knows this. The statistics are unambiguous about all of this. Then you get into Donald Trump, and he just does the same thing, but at an even more grotesque rate. He speeds it up. The tax cut, for example, in December of 2017 was an enormous giveaway to the richest people in the United States. That's after 40 years when they were already becoming richer than everybody else. It was outrageous. And everybody that I know, even right-wing economists that are friends of mine, shook their head in disbelief that you could even do this and that you could get away with it. Well, here's what I think happened. You squeezed the middle even more. You made it even harder for families to send their kids to college. You made it even harder to make that credit card payment at the end of the month. And it irritates and it bothers and it needles everybody. And then you see a bully white cop kill a person by pressing his knee into the person's neck. He has no weapon. He doesn't threaten you. You're a police person. You're supposed to be trained in how to manage these situations. It's so over the top that it's a trigger. And I think what you're seeing in the streets now are people with mostly complaints about how they've been treated for the last full generation or maybe even more. All the people who've seen their mothers and fathers lose the jobs that kept the family together, all the people who've watched the opioid disaster spreading as people have no future, no job, no way to live, no way to get married, no way to have children, all of the things that we thought were part of the so-called American dream. And I think the system knows it. I think the reason you're seeing large corporations, and I just read this morning that Pepsi Cola, which owns the Aunt Jemima brand, is ending that brand because Aunt Jemima is an image of a black serving person, all the rest, hello. Exact. But the reason you're seeing that is that the heads of corporations, they know what I am saying. They know that this is not just about African American people. This is not just about the police. The police, after all, are people, mostly working class people, thrown into an impossible situation to try to keep the lid on a society that isn't working for most people. I'm not excusing. The police have no justification, no excuse for the force that they are excessively using every day, particularly on black and brown people. No excuse. But you can try to explain why this happens in our culture.
The police themselves are middle class at best, are they not? Feeling the same squeezes. I mean, I don't want to, I'm clearly on the side for racial justice here, but I am also on the side of understanding the dynamic that is going on here.
Exactly. And you can't, asking the police to come in at the end of a process like this, when you've made the inequality and you've treated people badly at work and you've treated them badly in the credit markets, in the stores, in their homes, in what happens to their kids in school, and then you throw the police at them, you're just asking for explosions. And even a trained police force cannot handle this, shouldn't even be asked to do that. The police should be asked to do those marginal things that need to be done in a society, but they can't solve these levels of social problems. That's social movements have to solve social problems. And the failure of the police, I mean, let me remind everyone, in 2019, the last full year we had, American police killed 1,004 people. During the same period of time, the police in England and Wales killed 3 people. The police in Japan killed 8 people. The police in Australia killed 11 people. The United States killed 1,004 people. Something is very wrong here. And every one of those countries is less unequal than we are. So hint, 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 maybe your police won't behave in these outrageous ways, these unjust ways, if you do not treat a society the way capitalism in our system is dividing us into a tiny core of obscenely rich people and a vast mass of people desperately frightened about their future, let alone their children.
Professor Wolff, many racial justice activists argue that capitalism is directly tied to racism. Can you talk about that? Is our system based on winners and losers that are tied to racial identity?
Yes, but people should understand sort of the mechanism, if you allow me a couple of minutes to do this. Capitalism is an extremely unstable system. Wherever it has landed over the last 300 years that we've had it, it produces an economic downturn every 4 to 7 years. Let me give you just a simple example. Here we are in year 20 of a new century, right? We're in the 20th year of the new century. We had a crash of capitalism in 2000. We called it the dot-com crash. We had another crash of capitalism in 2008. We called it the subprime mortgage crash. And here we are in 2020 with another capitalist crash, which we call the COVID-19 crash. Okay, we can give them whatever names we want. That's 3 crashes in 20 years. Guess what? Works out to 7 years, roughly. So here's the problem. If you've subjected everyone in the population to the equal risk that every 4 to 7 years you're going to lose your job, you're going to have to rely on whatever savings you have, you're going to be interrupted in your life, in your education, in everything. People would have gotten rid of capitalism long ago. there's a joke I say to my students, if you lived with a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out long ago, right? It's intolerable. So in order for capitalism to survive, here comes the punchline. It can't subject the mass of people to the risk of a collapse every 4 to 7 years. It has to find some subgroup and make them the fall guy, the ones who absorb the crash every 4 to 7 years.
Wow.
In Europe, here's how it's in Europe, they bring immigrants in from the Middle East, from North Africa. They bring them into France, into Germany, and when the crash comes, they send them home. We used to do that in this country with Mexicans, with Latin Americans, with Puerto Ricans, and so on. But the group that was early on in American capitalism picked, if that's the right word, condemned would be a better word, to play that role, African Americans. Last hired, first fired. That's the system. And what you've done is over such a long time, put the instability of the system onto a particular subgroup whom you could identify because you can see the color of a person's skin. Okay, good. Those will be the ones we hire last. Those will be the ones we fire first. So they had to absorb, as a community, regular bouts of unemployment, low wages, using up of savings so they couldn't accumulate enough, say, for a down payment on a home or any of the other things. So yes, capitalism, by having to solve its instability problem by designating a particular group, found that the racism inherited from slave times was a very useful institution for capitalism. And that's why we can't get rid of it, because it's built into capitalism. And that's why the old argument is still true. You want to get rid of racism, it's the same issue as you want to get rid of poverty. You've got to deal with this system, because if you don't, you will not succeed.
We have questions coming in from the chat, which I will get to, but just following up on this line of thinking, how would a coordinated approach from a racial justice organizations and workers' rights groups work to help in this moment when the eyes of the world are on racial injustice in America?
I think there would have to be a fundamental commitment from both the private sector and the government. And I don't have much hope for the private sector, so in the end, it's from the government.
What? They're all advertising Black Lives Matter on Amazon. I've been saying this over and over. After they, treat their black workers like shit, then all of a sudden Black Lives Matter is
absolutely. They're scared, and they're going to go through the ritual until they don't have to anymore, and then it'll be ancient history that you and I and people like us will point to umpteen years ago when they once did for a while. And again, by the way, let no one make a mistake. It's because people went into the streets. That's why this is happening. It's not, I wish it were happening because the executives noticed that George Floyd was improperly treated. Not at all. Yeah. It happened because of the streets. Anyway, what the government would have to do is really make it clear. Everyone in this country gets a decent job at a decent income to raise a family. That's it. No discussion, no prevaricate. That's it. It's guaranteed. It's guaranteed to every African American family, every Latina family, every family there is, white, black, green, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. That's the first absolute requirement. And the second one is, with these jobs that are secure and guaranteed, and with the income that goes with it, these people can live, send their kids to school anywhere they want. There is no exclusion. There is no ghettoization. None of that. That becomes a violation of the law, prosecuted by the legal system, because it's untenable. I mean, it's extraordinary. By the way, just a footnote. This last week, the United States Supreme Court surprised everybody by saying that you can't be fired because you're gay or have your own sexual interests and your own sexual choices. That is a surprise, but it's also exactly what I'm talking about. Stop all the game playing. Stop the promises of a decent. No, you exclude people from what they need, which is a job, because of what you think about what they may be doing sexually, is so grotesquely out of order that it took, in this sad country, a Supreme Court decision to get. But that exactly is what has to be done about the job. The job is a right. If it's a right for you to be able to go to a public park when your family wants to have a picnic, if it's a right for you to have clean water to drink, then it ought to be a right for you to have a job and an income, and stop being ghettoized as this system has done, because you happen to have a particular color of your skin, which obviously you had nothing to do with choosing.
Professor Wolff, to the labor issue, I've noticed that the AFL-CIO has been slow to support the movement. Could you talk about that and what's behind that and how we can fix that?
It is a tragedy. There's no nice way to say it. The old joke, sometimes silence is louder than noise. Well, the silence from the AFL-CIO, it's not 100% silent. They are saying some things, and those are the right things to say. And there are particularly some particular unions that are very active. And I don't mean to throw everybody into the pile of what I'm about to say, but officially, the AFL-CIO is a terrible disappointment. I mean, we are now having the worst unemployment in a century. Where are they in the streets? Let me drive home the difference.
And the racial justice issue. Where are they in supporting the Black Lives Matter?
Yes, exactly. And I just gave you the explanation of how and why they could do it, because it's a threat to the mass of white workers that there's constantly other people who are willing to work for less money, because you forced them to work for less money most of their lives, who are going to come in and take the desperately crappy jobs that have been downgraded from what you used to pay the white people to do it. I mean, the white people ought to have understood long ago, you need to make the black brothers and sisters equal to you, because then they can't take away your job. They can't be substituted for you. They can't be always a threat that you wouldn't dare go on strike, because there are those desperately poor black and brown people who will be willing to work because they're treated even worse than you are. All of those things could be said, should be said by the AFL-CIO. But again, I want to make it clear, I don't think it's just the racial issue. You're right. They're slow, but it's because they're very weak and they haven't rebuilt their strength. They've allowed the system to weaken them. They've become weaker over the last 50 years. You watch the decline of American labor. It's like a straight line down. And so let me give you this one example.
Well, they could strengthen up if they would get out there in the streets and support all of those people who are out there.
Right. Look, there are less than 7% of the private sector workers in America are members of a union. 93% of the biggest sector of our economy, the private sector, is unorganized. And those people are being screwed today worse than ever. The union movement grew spectacularly in the Great Depression. The last time the union grew in America, the unions, was a spectacular growth in the middle of a depression. Hello, that's where we are now. Come on, scratch your chin and get busy doing what you ought to have been doing all along. The reason Germany, for example, Germany today has a 6% unemployment rate. At the beginning of the COVID virus, it had 5%. You know why it didn't go up more than from 5 to 6? Because the government, which is conservative in Germany, is afraid if they dared to throw millions of people out of work the way we did in America, their streets would be full of a strong union movement, a strong socialist party, a strong left wing that they have in their. They can't do it.
There are unions who are supporting this movement at this point.
Yes, absolutely. There have been an interesting coalition, I know, in the New York City area, a whole coalition of unions got together. Yes, and not the only, and locals in many parts of the country are supporting, et cetera, et cetera. No, it's a mixed bag. I'm talking mostly about the officials, the people at the top, the people who could mobilize the financial resources, the staffs to really begin. And if they
It
did
would
it
be
now,
nice to see those people being, interviewed on mainstream media also. I mean, really,
exactly.
where's the voice of labor? All we see is stock markets going up and down. It would be nice. We have about 5 minutes left, and
Okay,
four really, and I have four questions. So I'm, and I want to make sure the chat people get their
absolutely.
questions asked. So, okay, from Lauren, what will the consequences of the government's $1 trillion bailouts to artificially stimulate the stock markets be? Are we headed for a bigger collapse toward the end of the year due to these sorts of kicking the can down the road economic strategies?
Well, Lauren is right about one thing that many people don't understand. The government is pumping a lot of money into the economy, basically printing it and handing it out, mostly to businesses. Here's the problem: the people who run those businesses are not going to take that money and invest. They're not going to hire more people to produce more stuff, because with 40 million people unemployed, you can't sell what you've already produced. So the money isn't going to go where the politicians say they want the money to go. And by the way, the politicians know it perfectly well. So where does all that money go? Answer: to the stock market. That's why you see it booming, because the stock market is now being goosed by governmental money. It has nothing to do with our economy. It has to do with the government's decision to throw more money at our broken economy than they even did back in 2008. So where's it going? Well, you can already see. If you're rich enough to have shares in the stock market, roughly 10% of shareholders own over 80% of the shares. So we're talking once again about the rich. They're having a wonderful time. The economy may be down. They may not be going to work every day, but their stock portfolio is doing just fine. Thank you, Donald Trump and the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, for pumping all that money in. How far can it go? Well, look, if the richest in the country are becoming richer while the mass of us are unemployed, what you're seeing is a further increase in what was already an unstable inequality in the United States. So here's what's going to happen. I don't know if it'll happen before or after the end of the year. But if this kind of inequality keeps building, as it sure looks like it will, then what we have seen in the streets so far is nothing compared to what's coming.
Mm. Well, that's goes right into the rest of the questions here. A second question from Silent Chaos: Do you believe there will be a major supply issue in the second half of the year due to the chilling effect Corona has had on earnings and production?
Yes, there already is a chilling effect on supply. It started this way: supplies collapsed because everybody had to stay home. You couldn't go to work, you couldn't produce anything because it was too dangerous to your health. So the supply shock, if you like, hit the economy. But then when you threw everybody out of work, you began also to slow down the demand. I mean, people who are unemployed, they have to worry themselves sick. Will there be a job when I'm done with the unemployment? Will they even keep up the unemployment payment? Will they keep it up at the same rate? I mean, all of these uncertainties mean you don't spend money like you once did. You know, instead of hamburger, you shift over to hamburger helper because that's what you've got to do. And therefore the demand starts to drop. Well, if the demand drops, that in turn signals to the supplier, hey, don't produce. So you have this downward spiral reinforcement. And yes, I could imagine easily a supply effect or shock in the second half of this year coming out of the horrific mishandling of the current situation.
Another question coming in from Fortis Lee Foxes: defunding the police, while necessary, would leave thousands unemployed. What can government do for those people to ease the transition for them? The thought of former police with firearms training and an axe to grind is quite frightening, or is a scary thought.
Yeah, no, I think that other countries have had exactly that problem. You lay off the cops, or you deactivate the military, and pretty soon you have little militia groups in the woods training because they're had that
Not
in.
the woods. I want the woods to be safe.
Yeah, well, the woods can be just as dangerous as the city.
Ah,
But unemployment is a false problem. Again, the example of Germany, they decided not to make people unemployed. The French did the same thing. They don't have mass unemployment the way we do. You don't need to have that. What the Germans and the French did, by the way, was very simple. They said to corporations, if you want the government to help you, which the corporations are desperate, they have to get help from the government, we will help you, but on condition. You can't fire anybody. No unemployment. The French and German companies accepted the condition. That's why those countries don't have unemployment the way we do. There's no mystery here. Those people who are getting money from the government, their wages are paid, they don't go to work, but they're not unemployed. They have that job, and they have that job guaranteed, and they get that job back when this is over. It's a completely different way. If you said that, seriously, that we're not going to fund the police, if that was a real program, there's plenty of things for unemployed people to do. We could put all the millions or tens of millions of Americans unemployed. Let me give you a couple of examples. We haven't tested 5% of our people. We have an incompetent government that isn't even testing the vast majority of our people. Here's a good task. It takes about 2 hours, I'm told, to be trained how to give a corona test. The little swab in your nose, that's it. And then you put them
create jobs.
It would create jobs. There's jobs for 100,000 people to go out there, do something really socially useful, teach everybody whether they have this disease or not, make sure those who need it get treated, make sure those who are free can go to the store and go to their job with other people that have been tested so they know they're not in danger. Do it every other day. That's what's going on. That's what everybody understands is needed. Use the unemployed for that. We want to rebuild our infrastructure. Use them for that. We want a green America that's safe ecologically, that deals with, come on, we know what needs to be done. Look at the worst and the most profound critique of capitalism was always this. You got stuff that needs to be done. You got people who want a job, and you've got all the tools, equipment, and raw materials you need. Just put these three things together and you have a successful economy. Capitalism doesn't get the job done. It doesn't put them together. That's why today we have unmet needs, unused factories, and desperate people who want just a job, and this system can't put them together. That's why I'm a critic of capitalism.
Well, that would be a great place to leave it, but I don't want to let this one last question go unanswered. And we also have another guest waiting to talk about how to be an everyday revolutionary, which I'm so thrilled that she's here. Final question for you, Professor Wolff, and then a quick comment and we're out. Do you think we can ask this is from Thick Zeke, a regular watcher of act.tv, on the Twitch page. Do you think we can ask Mr. Wolff about what we can do to make the wealthy distribute their wealth back into society?
Yes, give them one of those offers they can't refuse. Tell them that there's really two options. They give it up now, most of it, or they risk losing all of it. That's the deal. If you have an enraged population, which is what we're building in America, and you have a system of universal suffrage, which we have, then sooner or later, the mass of people are going to use their power of the vote, and they're going to vote the kind of tax changes, the kind of legal changes, and you're going to no longer be, Mr. Bezos, the presider over $160 billion. You're going to be in the same boat everybody else is. And if you don't want that, which I would understand, then here's the deal. You part with most of what you have quietly, and you can keep a portion. If you don't, then don't expect us to be all excited about saving your rear end when the changes come that your behavior is now producing.
Everybody's at home. Isn't this what a general strike would look like anyway? Isn't this a way we could just take the power back and say, actually, we're not coming back until you change X, Y, Z, and ABC?
Right. And if we had an organized labor movement, it would be inviting half of the people who are still working to join those who are without jobs. And then the people without work become the majority. and then things can change. All of these things are coming down the pike. That's why I'm comfortable in saying it, because we're already moving at very fast speed towards an explosion in this society. That's what we're already seeing. We're seeing, as often, the African American community in the lead, willing to act first. They're hurt the most. Well, they see it better, and they're willing to take the chances. My only hope is that the rest of us will have the courage to follow the kinds of directions that their activity is now showing are on the historical agenda.
We're speaking with Professor Richard Wolff, who is the host of Economic Update. You can find it on YouTube, follow him, and support his work on Patreon. No one's paying this guy, and he is the voice for oh, sorry, I didn't mean to blow your cover here, but I'm just saying I think it's important that we support the work that you do, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on our Twitch channel, taking the time to be with us on our Facebook page. Every time you come on, we learn something new that hopefully we can apply to make a better world. Thank you so much, Professor Wolff.
Thank you, Juliana, and my appreciation, like so many, for all that you are doing to have these kinds of programs, to bring this material forward. It's more vital to the American history today than at any time.
If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. We also suggest you find Professor Wolff on YouTube and subscribe to his channel, which is Democracy at Work. And then I think there's another one. There's an Ask Professor Wolff channel now. I'm like, how am I not already subscribed? How did this happen? Anyway, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for watching. If you're watching us on Facebook on act.tv, stay with us. We have another guest. Thanks, Professor Wolff. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Julianna.